2, 1, go.
Hello and welcome to Writer Mother Monster. I'm your host, Lara Ehrlich, and our guest tonight is writer Katie Gutierrez. Before I introduce Katie, I want to thank you all for tuning in and let you know that you can now listen to Writer Mother Monster as a podcast on all major audio platforms or read the interview transcripts at your leisure, all on writermothermonster.com. And if you enjoy this episode, please consider becoming a Writer Mother Monster patron or patroness on Patreon. Your support helps make this series possible. Now, please also chat with us during the interview. Your comments and questions will appear in our broadcast studio, and we'll weave them into our conversation. Now, I'm excited to introduce Katie. Katie Gutierrez lives in San Antonio, Texas, with her husband and 2 children, who are 2.5 years old and 3.5 months old. She has an MFA from Texas State University, and her writing has appeared in the Washington Post, Longreads, Catapult, and more. Her debut novel, More Than You'll Ever Know, will be published by William Morrow in 2022, and she describes writer motherhood in 3 words as never enough time. Now, welcome, Katie.
Hi, Laura.
Hello. Hi, Katie.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks so much for being here. Now, to get started, we were talking before the interview about the process by which William Morrow picked up your novel. So can you tell our audience here about that process? Walk us through from going out on submission to signing that contract.
Sure. And if you don't mind, I'll go a little bit farther back just to give some context.
Sure.
So I had initially gone on submission in 2017, and this was with a book that had gotten 5 offers of agent representation within 2 weeks of querying. And so I was really excited and thought that a deal was, almost a foregone conclusion based on, what I'd been hearing from agents. We went out to, I think, about 40 editors at the time, and we got a lot of great feedback and some of the nicest rejections I've ever gotten, but nonetheless, still all passes. And so, the end of that process was really crushing, and I had a lot of fear that my agent was sort of going to drop me. And she told me something that I think I'll always remember, which was that she would stick with me for 100 books if that's what it took, because she believed in me that much. So fortunately, I kind of had another book idea at the time that I'd started working on during the submission process, which I recommend. And I started working on that right around the time that I became pregnant, my first pregnancy. I worked on that all throughout the pregnancy, or up until probably 7 months. And then the pregnancy was painful and difficult, and so I didn't write from 7 to 9 months and didn't write a word for the first probably 4 or 5 months after the baby was born. After that, I kind of got back to it, and it's taken, from 2017 to this past September to finish that book. It took about 18 months about a year to do the first draft, and then 18 months or a bit over to edit it with my agent, who, she put so much work into it. She read that thing probably 20 times. So we went on submission. We had kind of a definitive deadline for when the revisions had to be done, because I was at that point due with our second child. So we were wrapping up. I think I was already timing contractions. They were very mild and, really sort of Braxton Hicks, but it was at the time where it could happen at any moment. So I delivered the baby September 4th. He was due September 11th. And on September 11th was when we actually went on submission with the novel. So at that point, I was ready, she was ready, but we were still apprehensive because it was, it was during the pandemic. So we didn't really know what that meant in terms of how quickly people were going to be able to give it reads, et cetera. But at that point, we also thought, well, November was coming up, the election, the holidays. We sort of felt like if we didn't go then, it would be a matter of waiting until the new year. And at that point, I just felt like we'd been waiting for so long. I was ready to just get it out there. So we did. And on Monday, my agent called me at 9 or 10 in the morning, and she said that she had received emails from editors, 2 or 3 editors, I think, over that weekend, saying that they had either finished it and loved it, or they were still reading it and loving it. And I was in bed with the baby and my husband, and I, started to cry. And she said she had cried too when she saw the first email. She just had, put, I think, so much of herself into the process as well. So I said, well, what's next? And she said, well, these editors want to talk to you. So we'll start, trying to set up phone calls this week. And it was that week, I think, was kind of like this fantasy week that, I think that I've daydreamed about my entire life, and couldn't believe, even as it was happening, that it was happening. So I think I spoke with 5 or 7 editors, I think about 7 editors that week, including an editor from the UK who had gotten the book from a scout before we'd even gone on submission over there. And he made a preemptive offer sort of within, he read it, I think, in 6 or 7 hours when sitting, and then made the preemptive offer. And we hopped on the phone at about 11 p.m. his time, and then closed the deal just short of midnight his time. So it was like this complete whirlwind that day. And then the rest of the week was sort of calls with U.S. editors. And on Friday, Jessica Williams from Morrow made the preemptive offer. I was at the park actually with both kids. I'd taken the little one in the carrier, and I had my toddler, 2.5-year-old. She was, climbing the structures and asking me to, come down the slide with her, which I couldn't because I had the baby on me. But that was when my agent called and said that we'd gotten this preemptive offer. And so, I basically ran home to tell my husband, that's being generous, a week after childbirth. But so that's basically how the whole thing happened. It was this whirlwind that still seems pretty unreal when I think about it and talk about it.
So talk a little bit about what we were saying before the interview, this moment of signing a contract while breastfeeding your child. And
so, during those first phone calls, I was breastfeeding this newborn, which fortunately, that first week, it's like they're barely awake. So, I mean, that kid was passed out the whole time. Now it's a bit different. So this week I got the U.S. contract in and the U.K. contract in. And anytime I tried to sit down at my computer to actually look at them, it was like, my toddler came in and she wanted baby shark. And then, my I still call him a newborn, my infant was hungry. So I ended up, just yesterday kind of sitting in the dark, breastfeeding, looking through the contract, the UK contract on my phone, and signing it through EchoSign, while breastfeeding my baby in the dark. And like I mentioned to you, you have this fantasy as a writer of like what these moments will look like. And I never once envisioned it looking like that, but it also just felt, it felt completely right for where I am in my life right now.
Oh yeah, that's amazing. And congratulations again on the forthcoming publication. Can you tell us anything about the book? What is it about?
Sure. So it's about a woman who is secretly married to 2 men at the same time in the 1980s. She lives in my hometown of Laredo, Texas, which is right on the border of Mexico. And it's also about the true crime writer, the aspiring true crime writer, who becomes obsessed with her story today. So it kind of explores motherhood, as well as female desire, and also kind of the moral ambiguities of true crime, including, what is owed to the subject of any story, and who gets to tell which stories. So it's trying to do a lot, and I hope it's successful at some of it. But that's what's on my plate right now, is working on revisions.
Yeah. Well, that sounds wonderful. I'm a true crime fan, and of course a fan of any book that tackles motherhood and all of these complexities. Yeah, it sounds great.
Thank you.
Talk a little bit more about female desire. You mentioned that as a theme of the book. Why? What's the interest there in tackling and exploring female desire?
I think that as a country, we tend with this particular story, I think about how as a country we tend to romanticize con men. We make movies about them. It's like Catch Me If You Can. We cast Leonardo DiCaprio, and it's this very romantic idealized vision of of a man who's sort of, a rogue and doesn't go by anyone else's rules and is smarter than everybody else, and he kind of acts in his own best interest in this really kind of fun way, or at least that's how it's shown in the media. And when I think about it in terms of like men who are living double lives and who are married to two women at the same time and have these two families, I've always been really fascinated by that kind of story. And I realized at one point that you never hear that about women. And so that was just, I think as a writer, you come across these ideas that kind of percolate in the back of your head for any amount of, months or years. And this had been in my head for a long time. And I wondered about, what it would take for a woman to live that kind of double life. And about the fact that I wondered about what would make it different than when a man does it. Is anything different? And if so, what? And I think in the book, the idea is that, yes, something is different. She's not doing it for any kind of financial gain, which is, I've done a lot of research into men living double lives, and that's a really common through line. And so it's really about more of this, more about the emotion. She's a mother at the time of 12-year-old boys. She's a successful businesswoman. She's a banker. And she meets another man during her travels, but she still loves her husband. So for her, it's the question what she is trying to explore, I think, is who she is in both of these different relationships. That her desire is rooted not so much in the sexual aspect of it, even though that's there, but more about a curiosity into herself and who she might be in these different relationships and in these different lives. And I think that is a component of female desire, which is the desire, I think, to know and to be known, to see and to be seen, and to discover who we are in these different environments and relationships. So yeah, it's just something, that interests me, and obviously made its way into the book.
No, that was so eloquently said. And I agree with you. And I've heard that from other guests too, that there is a desire to explore female desire, if you want to put it that way. Because, as you said, men are often very free to explore male desire.
Right.
And women's desire is often depicted by men in a very different way than women experience it. So talk a little bit about creating a female character who is doing something that some may find immoral or unlikable.
Yeah, that's one of the most interesting things about the process of editing this book. So it's told from her point of view, as well as the point of view of this aspiring true crime writer. And on the surface, the woman who has this double marriage is the one who is doing this very taboo, very unlikable thing. But throughout every single draft that I've written and revised, I mean, her sections are almost untouched from the first draft. And it's had, a few readers at this point. And the consensus the consensus, or I guess lack of consensus, has been on the secondary protagonist feeling as though she kind of unlikable, and she is acting in ways that different readers haven't quite understood. Whereas the woman who lives the double life, everyone who's read the book so far has been like, yeah, no, I get that, but it's the other one that I'm kind of confused about. I don't know how I should be feeling about her. So I think that part of the experiment for me with this book was, let's look at a person who is acting in this like ostensibly amoral way and see if I can portray her in a way that very quickly makes her actions understandable. I think that's part of the fun of writing for me. If we can do that with a character, if we can take this character who is acting in these extreme ways or these unlikable ways and still make them understandable in some way to the reader, I think that's, I mean, to me, I think that is when you're succeeding as a writer. So that's kind of part of the project that I wanted to undertake with this.
Yeah, no, that's great. Did you always, I mean, this is such a basic question, but did you always want to be a writer and a mother, or did one sneak up on you?
Yeah, great question. I always wanted to be a writer since I was a kid. There was a project in, I think, like third grade to like make a little illustrated book in class, and I think that was the point from which there was no return for me. But the mother aspect, I always assumed that I would have kids one day, but it wasn't that same kind of like burning desire that there was to be a writer and to have this is my career. So in my 20s, it was kind of like very much not on my radar, motherhood, I mean. I just wasn't in a rush at all. And then it kind of got to the point where I figured out that I was diagnosed with PCOS. And so it turned out that I was infertile. And so that kind of put this whole other spin on things. I've always been someone that when I'm told that when someone tells me I can't do something, I like really kind of tackle it like with a lot of defiance. And so suddenly when I was told that like, hey, you've got a 1% chance of conceiving naturally, it was like, oh God, well, let me do everything I can to see if I can make this happen. And even at the time, it wasn't so much that I just wanted a baby that badly. It was just that I wanted to have that option, like I wanted to be able to make that happen for myself and make that happen for my husband and me. And so it took a while. It took about a year, I think, maybe more. And we tried, different things, fertility treatments, and I ended up being a diet thing to correct my hormonal imbalance. And it was actually the day that we were scheduled to go in for an IUD, an IUI, IUD that I got now, but an IUI, that I found out I was pregnant. And even at the time, it was kind of like I was overjoyed, but it was also like right along with that feeling of joy was this feeling of like fear and this feeling of, oh God, what did I do? Like, what is this going to mean for my life? That all kind of came like, it was not a simple emotion, getting that phone call from the nurse. Because it's still, I didn't really have an idea of how motherhood would fit into my life. And I didn't really have an idea of what kind of mother I would be, to be honest. Yeah.
Did you have expectations for yourself? You say that you don't know, and I think that's totally a feeling a lot of mothers share. I certainly didn't know what kind of mother I would be until you actually are a mother.
Right.
But did you have expectations for yourself of what kind of mother you wanted to be, or what you thought the experience might be like?
I think obviously, I think about, I have a great relationship with my mom. So I'm, really fortunate in that regard. And so, I always thought of, the things that I love about our relationship, and the things that I wanted to, it turned out that, our first child was a girl. And so, specifically with the daughter, I really wanted us to have a relationship where she feels safe with me, where she feels she can talk to me about difficult subjects, where I, am able to encourage her curiosity, really just kind of give her the space to be herself, which sounds really cheesy. But yeah, I want to be able to give her that room to grow into who, she wants to be, including making mistakes. But I also want to be able, to guide her. Obviously, every mom wants to, guide their kids in some way. So I think the biggest thing in terms of like what I hope for myself as a mother is really just that my kids always feel safe with me, feel safe telling me about any part of themselves and any part of their lives that they want to, that they need, help or support with. I think that if I can achieve that one thing as a mother, I would be happy. And then also, obviously, being able to raise kids that are, empathetic and good people. That's a top of list.
Yeah. What surprised you about the experience once you actually became a mother?
I think that so you asked about kind of the writing, and obviously we're here to talk about writing and motherhood, but I think my biggest fear around becoming a mother was that suddenly I would no longer be a writer. I wouldn't have the time, I wouldn't have the space. And in those first, and so I felt like, when we were on submission with the first novel at the time, and it didn't work out, I had this like overwhelming sense of, okay, I've got one more shot. I've got to finish this book before I have the baby, and we've got to go on submission, and we've got to try to make this happen because I don't know what it's going to be like afterwards. And I think that I was really wrong about that. I think that I had internalized a lot of like the whole pram in the hall crap, that being a mother is like anathema to being a creative individual, and to pursuing any kind of art. I think I really had internalized that. So I think that that has been a big surprise, in terms of how much being a mother has positively impacted what I do, even though actually getting to work, getting to write is more complicated. As far as motherhood itself, I think off the bat, I was really surprised at the anxiety. I'm not naturally an anxious person. I've never struggled with depression. I've never experienced anxiety to any kind of, debilitating level. And when I first had, my daughter, it was, I don't know if it was a combination of sleep deprivation. I don't know if it was, postpartum anxiety, or if it was just regular first time mom anxiety. I think like there's no way to know, I guess. But all I know is that I spent those first few months like not sleeping. And even when I could sleep, I wasn't sleeping because all I could do was imagine every single worst case scenario that could happen, to this completely helpless baby. And I think that that's, with being a writer, your imagination, is pretty vivid. And I had this, I felt like I had to like follow each fantasy through to like its whole conclusion, or else something bad would happen. It was very strange. And so I was really surprised at like the depth of that anxiety, the depth of my fear, around losing my child, and how that fear never will go away, how it just becomes sort of folded into your daily life as a mother, because it has to. Like if you focus on all of those what ifs, I think it's very hard to function. So I think what has surprised me is like the depth of that emotion, and how I think experiencing, this range of emotion, the love and the fear and the depth, and how they're both intertwined, like how much that feeds into the work that I'm trying to do. So yeah, a couple of things there.
Yeah, no, there's so much there. I also struggled with that sense of anxiety, and following those stories from the what if all the way through the conclusion of those horrible I don't even
Like,
call
what
them
is
like
that?
daydreams. Yeah, it
Yeah.
is. It's that like storyteller's
Yes.
fear.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I totally was right there with you of if I don't follow it through the course, then it will happen. So I have to fully imagine it so that it won't then happen.
Oh my
Yeah,
God. Like that's kind of wild to hear you say that you experienced it in the same
yes.
way.
Yes,
Wow.
totally. Yeah, it's kind of that I think it's a typical anxiety process where you're sort of anticipating the grief so that
Hmm.
or anticipating the bad things so that you stave it off, right? If
Yes.
you expect it, it won't happen. It's the unexpected things that get you
Yeah.
because you didn't prepare for them.
Mhm.
Um, so how does that feed into your work? How does that depth of emotion, not just love for that small children in your case who you've brought into the world, but also the fear surrounding their loss and just this depth of emotion you've never experienced before. How does that fit into your craft? How does it
Uh,
come through your work?
I mean, I would like to think that it makes it richer,
Mhm.
more complex. Like when I started working on this book that just sold, I think I was more focused on that aspect of female desire, on this aspect of the marriage, because at that point, I think when I started like outlining it, I wasn't pregnant yet. So my head was more in that relationship space,
Mhm.
the marriage space. And it became a lot more of a book about motherhood, sort of as the pregnancy progressed, and then had the baby, and then pregnant again, and then so all of these themes that like I'm living in day-to-day life, I think, and specifically not anything literal has made it into the book, but just those emotions. And also how contradictory it is at the same time, right? Because you can have this fear around losing your children and fear about, your own mortality, right? And them losing you, and the grief of this idea that you might not get to see them grow up because you're not here. Something happened to you. But then also it's like, for example, I just worked on a story for Texas Highways magazine where my husband rides motorcycles, and so I kind of fell in love with riding with him. And so for the story, I hadn't ridden on the bike for years, since I was pregnant for the first time. And the whole kind of idea for the story I pitched was, how do you manage the idea of risk in motherhood? Because when you start to think about risk and you start weighing, what could happen to you, what could happen to them, it can become this very debilitating thing where you end up being very overprotective of them, where you end up kind of isolating yourself in order to protect yourself and keep yourself here for them, when in fact that might not be the best version of yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Hi. Speaking of one of them. And so I think that part of it, part of these emotions is very contradictory. And so that was part of what I wanted to explore in the book, because as much as, this is my daughter, as much as my protagonist loves her children, she's also not willing to not have this affair. And she ends up, really potentially sacrificing her entire life with them and their sort of psychological lives and emotional lives by having this completely different marriage with another set of children. So again, kind of going back to the idea that like none of these emotions are simple, and we don't stop being ourselves. We don't stop feeling it's okay. Our own desires, our own the desire for adventure. Even we don't stop feeling these things because we are mothers, and so I think that it becomes a question of how do you balance these very deep emotions, or just live with kind of like the imbalance. I don't know if that answers your question. I got a little distracted by.
No, it's fine. Yeah. No, and we always welcome children on this show. Not a problem. I'm not sure if the audience got to see your daughter. I saw her down in the like expanded view. She's adorable.
Oh, okay, that's where I was looking at her.
Yeah, no, she's adorable. Yeah, no, I think that was part of my fear too in becoming a mother, was that you would lose yourself, right? Yourself would be subsumed by motherhood and by someone else's identity, and then you become simply mom. And mom is not a simple thing, but I was afraid that it would be a monolith. Like I would become mom and that's it. And that doesn't happen. And I don't think we hear enough from women who are managing to I mean, sure, it probably happens for some in some circumstances, but we don't hear enough from women who maintain their selfhood and their passions and their desires and their careers and their vocations, that it doesn't go away once you become a mother.
Yeah,
It's hard to maintain, but
exactly. It's hard to maintain. You really have to sort of like insist on it. You have to insist. You have to see the value and the worth, I think, in your own identity, and then like insist on whatever ways you can, on maintaining that. And sometimes it's 15 minutes a day, but it's important. I think, yeah. I mean, I think it's all too easy to sort of become subsumed, by this role, because it is all consuming. But I think, I don't know, at least speaking for myself, I think it would lead to a very unhappy whole person.
yeah, and exactly what you said, speaking for yourself. So everyone, of course, is different. And that's why I'm talking to so many different women about their experiences. And for some women, maybe it's okay to be consumed by motherhood for a while or for longer, and that brings someone joy and satisfaction. That wasn't ever something I wanted for myself, and it sounds like for you too, that you had things you wanted to hold on to, your writing career and your selfhood, and you've managed to do that. So can we talk about how you're managing to do that, the logistics of writing with now 2 small children?
Yeah. So So the timing of, selling the novel was really pretty perfect because, for the first couple of months, it was with my editors and I was waiting for them to kind of give me back their notes to see what the revisions were going to look like. So I was in kind of this limbo of like, I wasn't working on anything new. I wasn't revising what I had for like the first time in, I've been revising this book for, again, 18 months or longer. And so I just had nothing to do. And that was it was a perfect time to not have anything to do. It was the first, 2 months of having a baby. But I got the edit letter, let's see, when was it? It would have been right before Thanksgiving. And so ever since then, I've like very much had something to do. It was an intense, really brilliant letter that it kind of relit this excitement to go back into the book and try to kind of make everything that's in there even richer. But then became like the struggle really started as far as like when this was going to happen. Obviously, we don't have any childcare right now. We don't live in the same city as my parents. And so, every day it's kind of different. So I mentioned to you, before the show that some days, the days when I become the most frustrated, and like the angriest and like the worst version of myself, it's the monster, the worst version of myself, to my kids and to my husband and just to me are the days when I wake up with this really just urgent need and expectation that I'm going to sit down for at least an hour and I'm going to, whether it's a time limit or whether it's, okay, I'm going to revise 1 chapter or I'm going to write 500 words, like whatever. When I set these really concrete goals for myself and then the day kind of explodes and none of it happens, that's when I find myself like extremely resentful, of my kids, and my husband, the fact that he doesn't have to have, a baby on his boob every 2 hours. And this is that my husband, is a total equal partner in childcare, and I'm extremely fortunate that he's also at home, that he can work from home and participate as much as he does in child rearing, child caring. But it's still that's when like this furious resentment happens. And so it's the days when I kind of like really let go of control and just kind of tell myself, I'm going to touch the work at some point today. That's my only goal, is I'm going to touch it at some point. If it's working on 1 sentence, so be it. If it's 15 minutes, so be it. If I get lucky and they both nap at the same time and I get 2 hours, I'm going to do that, And those are the days when things go the smoothest for me, when I can appreciate being with the kids, but then also appreciate whatever time that I actually get to work is the days when I just like don't set any expectation for myself except for just I'm going to touch it, I'm going to move it forward in some way. And then I think the other thing is I was thinking about like practical strategies, for somebody, for moms in this position, especially with newborns. And like for me, I think what works best at this time is I'm reading the whole time. Like I've read more this year than I have really, any other year in recent history. It's a lot of, middle of the night Kindle reading, but I'm doing a lot of reading. And so when I read books that kind of seem to be in conversation with what I'm working on, that feels like I'm touching the work, and that helps me. And then it's also kind of giving myself permission to daydream, and to use those daydreams as also touching the work. I hope I get this right, but I think it was Alice Munro who said that part of her process for months sometimes before she even would sit down to work on a story is just sitting on her porch and just daydreaming. And that really resonated with me because I'm not really a fan of sitting at my computer and looking at a blank screen. Like I'm somebody who, has always thought best if I'm out on a long walk or if I'm kind of moving around somehow. And so I'm kind of taking this time to like be really active about using my daydreams for the revision process. And then that way I sort of feel like, again, I'm touching the work. It may not be anything that I've done on my computer that day, but it's in my head. And so when I get the chance to sit down, even if it is for 15 minutes, it's like straight to it, there's no procrastination. There's no, going online and looking at Twitter. It's like, okay, if this is the time that I have to actually sit down and get what's in my head onto the screen, then that's how I'm going to use it. And I'm going to do as much as I can. And so that kind of helps me too, is giving myself permission to like use that daydream time, and again, like middle of the night, it's a great time for the sort of those half dream, sort of connections that your mind makes when you're in the middle of a story. So those are kind of the, I guess, mental strategies that are working for me ish right now. But some days are better than others. Some days are extremely frustrating, and then other days, I feel okay about where I am, and I know the work's going to get done. It's just going to get done at a different pace.
Yeah. The message that we all hear as we dream about being writers, that message, you have to have a schedule, you have to write every day. And then you see these successful writers like, I don't know, Hemingway or Faulkner, who have like, I write from 5 a.m. to 1 p.m. and then I have a long lunch and walk, and then I write again from like 3 until, midnight or whatever. And it's so damaging, I think, to think that that is the way that you become a writer. And I hear that again and again, particularly from men, although not exclusively, that stringency and the idea that to write you must be sitting with your notebook, writing by hand for a certain amount of time a day, when that's not real life, particularly for women, particularly for mothers. Where daydreaming is writing, and taking a walk and thinking through a plot point is writing, and reading something tangential to your own work that is in conversation, that's writing. So I think that's really valuable to hear as another writer mom, that all of these things are writing, and that it's not exclusively sitting in front of your computer for like 6 hours a day, because that's not possible.
Yeah, exactly. And all the men, who do have those schedules, the ones who have kids, like who's watching the kids, right? Like what did the children's mother give up in order to be in that position, of primary caretaker? Or, did they have full-time help? Are the kids in childcare? Like all of these things, I think, like, in the past, this conversation around, writing is this like very solitary, strict, like strictly scheduled or regimented like existence. There's so much happening in the background that I think, in this sort of patriarchal society and in this very like sexist culture, like was not talked about, so I think all of these conversations around like what does it really take to make a book happen? What does it take behind the scenes for a father, who is a writer, to make that book happen? And what does it take behind the scenes for a mother who is a writer to make that book happen? Like I think all of and right now, the pandemic is heightening all of these conversations, because, as we've seen, it's women who are leaving the workforce at a much more alarming rate at this point than men. And it makes sense, because men are paid higher, on the dollar for the same work. So when a couple is sitting down to kind of determine, well, who should give up their job to homeschool the kids during a pandemic, it ends up being like, well, the one who's earning less and who earns less, it's the woman typically. So I think all of these conversations that we're having now around really like what does it really take to make these things happen are so valuable. And there's certainly, when I did have my first baby and I was kind of freaking out about the fact that I hadn't written in months, there was just no time. She wasn't napping, she wasn't sleeping. And I felt like, oh my God, am I ever going to write again? Like how is this ever going to happen? It was so incredibly valuable and encouraging to me to, hear from other writer moms, like on Twitter, who had published books saying, I wrote this book, over 5 years during my kids' nap times. And okay, 5 years, might be like, oh my God, is it going to take 5 years? But just hearing like, wow, like this book was written entirely during your baby's nap times, like that was huge as a new mom to hear. So I think it's really, important and hopefully valuable to people to kind of hear that how these things are getting done by writer moms.
Yeah, and it's definitely a counterculture. It's a minority of voices that are countering this age-old perception of writing, as you said earlier, as being incongruous with motherhood, and that to be a true writer with a capital W, you can't also be a mother with a capital M.
Yeah.
Because those are the narratives that we hear growing up. Right before I got pregnant, and I've talked about this before, that book came out, and I always forget what it's called, but like Selfish something something, and it was a book of essays by women writers who decided not to become mothers,
Mm.
and about that choice. And it's a perfectly valid book to have published, um, but it just adds to that conversation in that sense that you can't do both.
Mm-hmm.
And there are not enough voices out there saying, yes, you can, and here's how you do it, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, so let's see. What were some of those messages that you heard growing up that you're now realizing um, are not valid or not applicable to you as a writer and or a mother? We talked a little bit about the expectations you had for yourself and about the belief that we hear from above that you can't be both a writer and a mother. What are some of the other beliefs that you held around writer motherhood that you're challenging now by doing it?
Um, I don't think it was anything I explicitly heard as a kid. I was, my mom always worked
Mhm.
growing up, so my mom had a full-time job. So I never had, and my parents were entrepreneurs, and so they worked together in a lot of different capacities. But it was always, both of them full-time, and so I never had this idea of like the mom should stay at home, and that's how it's done. I always had the example of a mom who took us to and from school and was the PTA president and did kind of take us to all of our extracurricular activities, but she also had a full-time job, and now that I look back I'm like, man, I really don't know how she did that, because like in no way am I writing for 40 hours a week, and trying to make everything else work. So I don't know how she did it, but she was the example I had of like working outside the home, alongside being a very present mother. So I think, it was just more internalized. I think that fear of like losing myself, as a mom, like the fear of losing myself, the fear of losing the space or the time. I think there was even a part, well, I don't know. There may have been a part of me that even feared losing the desire to write, but I think that it was also, writing has always been just who I am, that there was also kind of the part of me that knew that desire would never go away, and kind of worried that like if I did become a mother and if motherhood really did challenge my ability to write, like I worried about who I would become in that case. Would I be angry? Would I be resentful? Would I ever be able to be happy if I wasn't also writing? All of those questions, I think were internalized. But I again, growing up, I was always very fortunate that I had, both of my parents were extremely supportive of my writing. I left my full-time job a few years ago so that I could focus on my writing, and my dad was really instrumental in sort of giving me that push to do that. And so I think that I always had very, enthusiastic, supportive voices growing up. And so that's also, obviously what I hope to, have as a mother as well, for my kids. Like I don't care what they want to do, like if they are passionate about something, I want to be able to encourage them to pursue it. And yeah. So again, I don't know if that's, exactly an answer to your question, but I think it was more about just, yeah, challenging my own internalized perceptions about what it would mean to be a mother and a writer, more so than to challenge anything that I heard explicitly as a kid, because if anything, I got the opposite message, which, again, very, very fortunate.
Yeah, isn't that funny though that you had those positive messages from sort of external places, from your parents and from the world in which you grew up, and yet somehow still internalized these fears and these
Yeah,
impressions. Yeah,
that's so true. Yeah.
yeah, they're just that strong, I think. So,
I think
what
you're
do
right.
you hope that your daughter will take from you as a writer, from seeing you writing, from reading your books someday?
That's that's such an interesting thought to think of her, like reading my books eventually. She's finally at the age just yesterday. I feel like one of these stopped working and I'm hearing myself in a weird way. You can still hear me okay?
Mhm.
Uh, yeah, so she likes to come into my office and like this feels like one of those like bad mom moments, but I hand her my phone so that she can just be on my phone while I work for a little while. So if she is awake and the baby's asleep, that's kind of what we do for small amounts of time. But just yesterday, she came up. Well, she wanted to use my phone, and so she came up to me and she said, "Mom, you want to do some work today?" And I was like, yeah, I mean, I actually would like to do some work today. She said, "Okay, let's go to your office. I'll use mommy's phone. Mommy, do some work." And so we came into my office, and she kind of came up to my computer and was like looking for really the first time, watching me type, watching the words on the screen. And this is also kind of in this last couple of weeks. We always read books before bed, but in the last couple of weeks, she kind of started to figure out that I could just make up stories, that we didn't necessarily need books. So I've been making up stories for her before bed. And so, yesterday or today was kind of the first time where I said to her, "Oh, how mommy tells you stories before bed without books? This is what mommy does. Mommy is writing stories." And then I kind of held up a book and I said, "Mommy's, mommy's writing one of these books." And she said, And I could see her kind of trying to like put it together. And it was like a kind of a strangely emotional moment for me, like, having this small child who is starting to understand, what I'm doing when I'm not being present with her, and being able to and I felt very proud to be able to say to her, like, I am still doing this. I have now, like, but even if the book hadn't sold, like, even if I didn't have that sense of, writer with a capital W, like even if I was still working on the book and we hadn't gone on submission, like I felt very proud to show her that I was still working on it, even if it means kind of not being present with her in the same way. So I hope that as she gets older and she goes to school and I'm writing more, and when she sees the actual physical copies of the book and your books, and if she is old enough to actually read them, like, I hope she feels proud, like whether or not she likes the books, whether or not it makes her feel weird, to read them. I think that'll be strange in some way because, she'll be getting access to some parts of me that she obviously doesn't see as her mother. But I also hope that, when those days come, it'll bring us closer, because she will be able to hopefully see me as more than just her mother. And also be able to see that, I was able to, I don't want to say do it all, because it's one of my best friends, she said, well, yeah, once you have kids, you can do it all, but you're not going to do any of it very well. And I think about that a lot. And I think it's so true. I may be doing it all, but I'm not doing any of it particularly great at any given time. I'm just kind of doing it. But I hope that she eventually sees that and sees that it's possible and feels proud. And I hope that she is able to internalize that, if she wants kids one day.
Yeah, no, that's wonderful. And I love that what your friend said about having it all. Yeah, I've heard something similar. You can have it all, just not at the same time.
Yeah.
Which is really hard for me to tell myself, because I do want to do it all at the same time.
Yeah.
Yeah, but you do often feel like you're failing on all fronts. I feel
Yes.
like, even though from the outside, someone might look at you and say, "Oh, you're raising 2 kids, you have a book deal, your house is relatively clean, or you have a good marriage," but it always feels like it's falling apart.
Yeah.
Doesn't it?
Yeah, I just texted a friend that the other day, like it was one of the bad days, and I had like had 4 separate breakdowns, of crying, and I texted her, like, I feel like I'm failing on every front, like I was snapping at my daughter, like I was so resentful of, this baby boy who just wouldn't sleep. Like every time I sat down, I had to get back up. And I just was, I felt like everything that I was trying to do, everything I was trying to be, I just wasn't, it was a complete failure. And I feel like some days, some days are just going to be like that. And I'm talking to a friend. We're talking about mommy's work.
She disappeared.
She's especially shy during the pandemic. We see no one. But yeah, really, that is the truth of it. Like, I think that, sure, like on the surface, it does look like, these things are like at least being managed. They're moving along, but really, on a day-to-day basis, it can very much just feel like, I'm failing at everything that I'm trying to do.
Yeah.
And then you have to just sort of like just know that, tomorrow's another chance to try to fail like a little bit less at least one thing.
I think it's so important to express that and to put words to it, because I think, at least in my experience as women, we try to look as though we have everything under control, right? Like
Mm,
we want people to think that we're under control, that our houses are clean, that our kids are well adjusted, that we're super women, and we're
mhm,
not honest with each other about struggling and how hard it is,
mhm,
because that shows weakness, or we perceive that that might be weak, particularly in a male-dominated world, but
mhm.
also, like, the publishing field is so male-dominated, you don't want to
Yeah.
appear as though you're not managing everything, so the more people, like you just did, who say, "I might look like I have it together, I'm managing, but I feel like everything's falling apart all the time," that's the reality of it, right?
Yeah, it
I've
is.
never heard one writer mom who said, "I've got it all together, I'm, like,
Nope.
I'm succeeding in everything I wanna do," yeah.
Oh man, no. No, I mean, if somebody, good for them, if that's, how somebody actually feels and is living, but yeah, it's certainly not my experience and not the experience of any writer moms that I know.
No,
I mean, it's
no.
just constantly kind of texting each other like, "Did you get to do anything today? Nope. How about you?
Yep,
Nope. Maybe sleeping? Nope. How about you? Nope."
yep,
It's like, yeah, just really kind of muddling through and doing what you can. Like I think, again, to me, it kind of comes down to, like, when it comes to the work, it's just like trying to do something that feels like you're touching it every day. And then when it comes to your kids, trying to have like at least a couple of moments where you are in trying to enjoy them, and not just thinking about what they're taking you away from, right?
mhm.
Or what they're how they're behaving in a way that's not how you want them to behave. Like, there's just, I think, like, on days when, yeah, on days when I can do that, push the work forward a little bit, enjoy my kids a little bit, like, that's when it feels like, okay, things are well managed. But that's not every day.
Not every day, and it's also just for now, right? I
Yeah.
mean,
Uh-huh.
we were talking before the interview about the fact that you've now gone through the newborn phase twice, and that you learn each time, that things change so quickly.
Mhm.
And I think, like, for me, 4 years old is so different from 4 months old.
Oh my God. Yeah, I
Oh
bet.
my gosh, and my daughter can now kinda play by herself a little bit,
Yeah.
and I can sit there and get a little bit of work done, and I hear 5 is the magical age where they can do that a little bit more. So, yeah, it keeps changing too. So it's so important, I feel like, to talk to women with a range of ages and experiences, and support each other, and have these conversations, and that we're not alone in the challenge that is motherhood and writing motherhood.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Yeah,
Yeah.
that is definitely something I keep trying to remind myself of when it comes to the baby, is like trying not to
Mhm.
wish this time away, because it does. I look at my daughter, and she's so big now, and she's so independent, and a lot of times, there are times like she doesn't want to be with me. She doesn't want to play with me. She's fine playing by herself or playing with her dad, or, when my parents are around, like, forget it, like, I'm dead to her, you know. Um, and you like so the time when they do need you 24 hours a day, like that time, it feels so long and endless when you're in it, but, like, just when I look at my daughter, like, it's proof that doesn't last forever, and it's gone before you know it. And so that's also something that I try to remind myself of when I'm feeling, like, particularly just frustrated,
Yeah.
because so much of my days are frustrated. And so trying to remind myself, to just kind of enjoy this while I have it, because it's not long. That's, something I also try to try to do.
Yeah, but not to feel bad too, right? If you're not enjoying
Mhm.
it, or if you're frustrated, or if you feel like you would rather be working than,
Yeah.
building the 5th tower out of
Mhm.
blocks or
Yep.
whatever.
Yeah, exactly. And I think about, like, in a lot of ways, it's the pandemic, it, like, we're living in a very privileged way during a very unprivileged time, because we have two parents in the household who are both, sort of equal participants in childcare, and it's still really freaking hard. And so I think about, I think about single moms or single dads, or people who are in abusive relationships, or people who are at more of an economic disadvantage than we are. Like if things are so hard for me right now, for us right now, I think it's so much harder for so many other people. And I think that it is okay and good to acknowledge that, and to say also, like we were talking about earlier, like you don't have to be sitting at your computer to be writing, but it's also okay to just not be writing, like it's also okay to do
Yes.
absolutely nothing that touches on your work, because you're also a person apart from being a mother, and apart from being a writer, and you need to, be able to occasionally take care of that person as well, lest you become the monster, right?
Yeah.
So yeah. Hi.
No, that's I think a very important point, and I'm glad we're kind of ending on that point, because it is so vital to be kind to ourselves. And I know that sounds like such a therapy thing to say, but it's true. This is an unprecedented time that reveals cracks that are so deeply embedded within our society and our culture,
Mhm.
as you said earlier. That yeah, I think it's important to remind ourselves and others who are listening that we don't have to be writing the great American novel right now, or
Right.
anything. We don't have to be writing
Yeah.
anything. Yeah.
Like right
It'll come
now,
back.
yeah, it'll come back.
Yeah.
Right now, I think it's just about surviving. We just have to kind of, we just have to get out of this in whatever ways that we can, while still kind of keeping ourselves somewhat sane. um,
Exactly.
yeah.
No, well, and part of that is talking to people, to,
Mhm.
community and friends, and doing
Yeah.
things like this. So thank you so much for taking an hour out of your crazy just existence to talk
Thank
to
you.
me.
Trust me, it's incredibly refreshing.
Oh, that's great. And I hope you'll come back when your book comes out and we can do another talk, and your
Yeah,
kids
of
will be
course.
older and you'll have your book we can hold up. And
Yeah, that'll be
yeah.
so exciting. I'd love to. Thank
Do
you
you know
so much,
when?
Laura.
Of course.
Uh,
Really quickly, do you know when it will be up for pre-order, or is that something that's still to come?
I don't know about pre-order. It'll be published, I believe, in summer 2022.
Okay.
So I don't know how long before that, it usually goes up for pre-order, but I'm sure I'll be screaming about it obnoxiously. So
Well,
when
let
it's
me
available,
know.
I will.
Let me know so we can share with this community. And
Thank
thank
you.
you again for coming out tonight.
Thank you again for inviting me.
Of course. And thank you all for watching and for tuning in, and for some comments that came through. Thank you so much. So you can watch this video again, listen to the podcast, or read the interview transcript, all on writermothermonster.com. And excuse me, again, if you enjoyed the conversation, please also consider becoming a patron or patroness on Patreon. And I will see you all again next week. Thank you so much, Katie.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.